Hi, that was my version of Honeymoon Blues by Robert Johnson. Now, Honeymoon Blues is a nice piece of Delta blues music that's very typical of Johnson's playing style. And it's also very similar to his other song, Me and the Devil Blues. So I've played through my version of it. What I want to do now is have a look at the structure of the music. Then I want to give you some tips on playing it. And finally, I'll play through it again slower and I'll stick the tab on screen. Okay, now I want to have a look at the structure of the music, and this is pretty straightforward. So it's mostly in 4/4 time, it's a 12-bar blues, and it's played on a guitar in standard tuning. Now it's in the key of A, and it uses the chords you'd expect to find for a 12-bar in the key of A, which is A, D, and E, and their 7th equivalents. Now the original recorded version by Johnson is actually in the key of B flat, which is a half step up. So if you want to play it in this key, you can do it by taking your standard tuned guitar and either putting a capo on fret 1 or tuning all the strings up a half step. I, however, have just left it in standard tuning and just played it in A because I think it sounds good in that key. Okay, in terms of the structure of the music, it's basically just the 12-bar sequence getting repeated throughout the entire song with variations, which is very common in Johnson's music. So what I've given you in my version is, I've given you the intro section, I've given you the first two playthroughs of the 12-bar section, and then I've given you the outro section, and I've tried to stick as close as possible to Johnson's recorded version. Okay, so if you want to stretch out the music, all you have to do is keep repeating the 12-bar sections. You can either repeat the sections I've given you, make some of your own up, or have a listen to Johnson's original recordings. But just remember, a lot of the stuff that Johnson was putting in when he recorded it was probably made up as he went along in an ad-lib style, so don't feel you have to stick closely to what he played. Okay, that's all I want to say about the structure. Now I want to give you some playing tips. Okay, so now I want to give you some playing tips. Now the music's actually pretty straightforward to play, but there are a few little things that might trip you up, and that's what I want to have a look at. So the first thing I want to have a look at is this 2/4 bar. Now the rest of the music's all 4/4, but he's decided to put a cheeky little 2/4 bar in, and that's at bar 12 in the music that I've given you. Now, if you were looking at the structure of the music through a standard 12 bar, the bar 12 would be played with an underlying A chord, but it's not. He does a change to the chord, which is actually quite hard to work out, and then plays it as a 2/4 bar. So that's what I've put in my version. If you don't like this, or you think it sounds off, just play this bar with an underlying A chord. And if you don't like the 2/4 bar, just play it as a 4/4 bar. It'll sound fine. So you can easily play bar 12 as a 4/4 bar with an underlying A chord, and it'll sound absolutely fine, although not 100% true to the original recorded version by Johnson. So the next thing I want to have a look at is the bass notes. Now throughout the majority of the song, he plays the bass notes on each beat of the bar as quarter notes, which is fine. But in bars 19 and 23, he introduces eighth notes as bass notes, and this can trip you up, especially with the triplet feel on the music, which means that the eighth notes get played as split triplets and not with equal spacing. Now, if you're having any trouble playing these bass notes in these two bars, you can just leave out the eighth notes and just play quarter notes on each beat of the bar, and that will make it significantly easier to play. That being said, it is worth practicing this because it does give it a nice sound and adds a nice bit of variation to the music. So if you listen through to the version that I've done, you'll hear the correct duration and the correct timing for these eighth notes, and with a bit of practice you should be able to pick it up. But if you are struggling, just play them as quarter notes on each beat of the bar like the rest of the music and you should be fine. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is the bass notes again, But this time I want to look at how many strings you're picking when you're playing the bass notes. Now, through a good part of the song, the bass strings are played palm muted, so it doesn't really make a huge amount of difference how many strings you're hitting. But when you listen through Johnson's recorded version, you'll hear in parts he is hitting two bass notes together, kind of like this, as opposed to. So in the version that I've done, I've used the double string bass notes where possible, but to make it easier to play and more accessible, I've dropped it down to single string bass notes when it becomes quite awkward to play them as double strings. Now you can listen through Johnson's recorded version and you can play through the version I've given you and have a look at these bass notes, which ones are double strings, which one are single strings. And you can choose how you want to play them. You might want to play all of them as double strings, although that would be quite tricky, or you might want to play them all as single strings. But if you are wanting to play them as double strings, all you have to do is make sure you've got the underlying chord formed underneath and it'll sound fine. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the use of palm muting on the bass strings. Now, Johnson was a real fan of using palm muting, and he used it a lot in this song, and he used it a lot in his other songs as well. And it works well when you're singing over the top of it, because the palm muting dulls out those bass strings and allows the voice to ring through. However, if you're playing it as a solo piece, sometimes these notes can sound a bit dead and flat. Now, it's really up to you if you want to employ this palm muting technique or not. I've done a previous video on it showing you how to do it. However, if you're struggling with it, just leave it out. If you feel that the sound isn't what you want, just leave it out. However, if you are singing over it, it might be worth considering keeping the palm muting in, as it might let your voice ring out more. Okay, that's all the playing tips I want to talk about. Now I'll just play through it again slower and put the tab on screen.